Now, consumers continue to be under pressure due to the current unfavourable economic conditions. According to Stats SA, retail sales declined by 0.9% year-on-year in June. That's an almost 1% drop. The largest negative contributors to this decrease were general dealers and retailers in hardware, paint and glass. Well, seasonally adjusted retail trade sales increased by 0.2% in June. That is compared with the previous month. Comparing the second quarter of this year to the same quarter last year, retail trade sales decreased, though, by 1.4%. The largest negative contributors, as I said, general dealers and those paint and hardware shops, retailers in textiles, clothing, footwear and leather goods were the only positive contributors in this period. Consultancy firm Deloitte has recently released its Food Frugality Index as measured in June of this year. It found that consumers are shifting their food purchasing habits to adapt to the higher inflationary environment. And while Stats SA has indicated that inflation is generally slowing down, food inflation has remained one of the stubborn categories that has been slow to calm down.
As the Deloitte Index suggests, consumers have become increasingly frugal in how they buy their groceries. This as wages have remained stagnant for many, while inflation has eroded the value of the rand in people's pockets. Gone are the days of just shopping without thinking. Customers are putting major thought into their purchases before they get in store. And the evidence suggests that things are tight.
Interestingly enough, only 35% of people say that bought what they wanted to buy. And in fact, there's a large majority that said we left the tills with wanting to buy something, but we never bought it because of our situation. So they're making trade-offs and making decisions not to buy things.
Households are more mindful to buy for their exact needs and not buy surplus, which may ultimately go to waste. They're also buying less expensive ingredients to cook at home.
On the one hand, you might have an example where people are shifting from proteins, let's say from beef to chicken, or then within beef, they might decide to go, instead of the high-end steak cuts, they might move to the sort of lower-end, stewing beef types of situation. So we find people making trade-offs in ingredients. We find people are making trade-offs in terms of sizes. So instead of buying a 12.5 kilogram maize meal, let's buy a 10 kilogram maize meal and we'll just stretch it longer and make the portions work.
Deloitte says that consumers are doing away with buying their favorite food brands and buying more affordable supermarket house brands instead. This change in buying behavior is informing retailers to adapt to these new realities.
I think retailers and manufacturers themselves are looking at taking costs out of the system, also from their own point of view, wastage. How can we reduce costs to get the product onto the shelf, so that we minimize the pass-through of wastage and wastage of costs to consumers? I think the back-end operation of retail is becoming smarter. And also what we have on our shelves. You don't have to have multiple offerings of the same category.
Going forward, Deloitte thinks that consumer sentiment will likely remain under downward pressure, given all the macroeconomic headwinds the country faces. These include load shedding, relatively high unemployment, and the low economic growth situation. And only time will tell if the changing food purchasing behaviours observed will be a temporary feature or a more permanent consumption trend. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, what is clear, consumers are under pressure from the higher cost of living, with many unable to keep up with debt repayments as well. Senior economist at ABSA, Miyelane Maluleke, says the high interest rate environment is eroding the disposable income of households. Maluleke says there are signs of rising consumer debt distress, with arrears rising as well. He says a subdued consumer spending environment will also dampen the already weak growth momentum.
One of the things that will continue to constrain growth, we think, is that when we look at the demand side of the economy, we think about the consumer specifically, it's clear that there is a fair bit of pressure that is building on that front. Of course, interest rates have gone up quite significantly over the last couple of years. We're seeing the effects of that quite clearly in debt service costs, which are really taking away from people's disposable incomes. We've also seen that wage inflation also hasn't really caught up with headline CPI inflation. So people have been seeing some real disposable income erosion from that perspective as well. And I think you do see, I think, some of the effects of this sort of tougher environment on consumers. When you look at data from the National Credit Regulator, we have been seeing that arrears are starting to pick up. There's a lot of people out there who are finding it difficult, I think, to sort of keep up with their debt repayments in this environment. So that, to us, does not look like the kind of consumer that's going to be providing a huge amount of support to economic growth.
South Africa's social grants need to be increased in line with inflation to avert extreme poverty and starvation. That has been echoed by analysts who believe that government must reprioritise its expenditure and implement the long-awaited basic income grant. They believe this will put more money in the pockets of many vulnerable South Africans and help stimulate the economy as well.
South Africa is regarded as the most unequal society in the world, and the gap between the rich and the poor continue to widen. Compounding the problem is the high unemployment rate, which currently stands at 32.6%. Experts say the social grant system is insufficient to keep people from poverty, and that this is likely to create intergenerational poverty traps.
Because we have such high unemployment levels, our social security net needs to catch people from going into abject poverty, needs to catch households where children might possibly die because of undernutrition. So our social security net needs to be strengthened, and by that I mean we need to invest more into our social security grant system. And that is not such a terrible idea, because a lot of economists say that that cannot be done. Actually, it can be done if we reprioritize a government expenditure, because if we do that, what we will do is we will create demand in the South African economy. So people having more money in their pockets will be able to spend more.
Eli Mashiane lost his job in April this year after being employed since 2018. He also lost his belongings, including clothes, after being evicted from an informal settlement where he was residing on the East Rand. He says he often goes 2 days without eating as he simply does not have money to buy food. The only time he gets a full meal is when NGOs deliver food at his informal settlement, but even that is beginning to dry up. He says the hardship he's experiencing has taught him to prioritize.
We are not more focusing to buy expensive foods or expensive clothes, or the only thing that we can afford on that day. If there is no food, there is no food. We just drink water with ourselves. As I said, even yesterday, the whole day, I haven't ate anything. Like now, it's only now they donate 2 rands. I just hear my colleagues who are part of leadership, they say, can we buy bread and cold drinks there? Meaning is our breakfast, is our lunch there. We just ate that bread done for the whole day. We will see tomorrow what's going on.
But it's not only the unemployed who are battling to make ends meet. The high prices of food, electricity and transport are forcing many consumers to dig deep into their pockets. The national minimum wage, which is currently 25 Rand per hour, means that many workers get paid on average 4,500 Rand per month. Recent research conducted by the Bureau of Market Research showed that 73% of the working population earn less than 6,000 Rand per month.
When you deduct transport and you deduct electricity off a wage of about 4,500, then you are left with something in the region of about 1,200 Rand. Now, if you divide that amongst 4 people, then you find that actually the amount left for food is between 400 and 500 Rand.
Experts have called on the Department of Social Development to ensure that those who qualify for a grant receive it. They also commented on inefficiency in the system that makes it difficult for people to secure social grants. Households have been encouraged to grow vegetables in their backyards for own consumption and to sell for an income. And local churches are called upon to help strengthen social networks and to offer support to the needy and vulnerable. Naledi Matlapeng, SABC News, Johannesburg.